assumed the responsibility of being the historian of the records and archives of Temple Israel. And I just want to show you, this was a drawing by Louis Goodman, who designed our new sanctuary. And we had several dedications here. Okay. We had several dedications here, and we had a dedication in 1923, 1955, 1957, and we just had a recent one, May 24th to the 26th, 1991, and here we have some pictures of the way we were in the old days, with the floor going down and tilting down because the foundation was falling apart, and then we had to take everything apart and rebuild, so we had a new sanctuary. And you can see the pictures here of taking it apart, the different stages of construction, and the architect Louis Goodman made the temple on a postcard that he saw from Kielce, Poland. And I included some pictures of the shows that they used to do in Poland. Saul Schurter interviewed a lot of the people from Franklin County, and I have the transcripts that Saul made, and they cover most of the people who you'll see today in the room. We also have, I think you might be interested in this. This is the Baptist church that later became the first Hebrew congregation of Greenfield in 1925, and it had many changes, but it used to be the Hibernian Hall and then became the Baptist church. Okay? This is the original drawing model of the temple, and this is the way it used to be. And here I amassed, which took an amazing amount of time to get, but I got the recent history of the honoring the past presidents, the rabbis who were here, and
I'm the new president. Thank you, but this isn't about me, this is about you all. So I want to focus on you. I can't believe I actually asked to speak today, because those of you who know me know how much I hate speaking, but I really felt like I wanted to welcome you all, and I want you to know how much I truly honor. My first job, I was 14, I worked in a nursing home. And my job, I was too young to be an aide, but my job was to sit and talk to people, or do their hair, or do their nails. And I talked to all the older people, and I heard their stories. And at 14, I really got the connection, you know, the past, how important it is, and how I come from the past. And so, you know, I think I got it younger than most people get it, how important it is to honor the elders of the community. So I just have one little small thing I want to do to signify how much I feel like it is important to honor the past. So I would like to ask Lenore, would you like this? I know you're not one of the, well, maybe I'll ask one of the older elders. I'll ask you guys. Would you like this candle? There you go. So let me take that.
Good have it back.
I have to do it here because that's not flat, but that signifies the light and the spirit that the elders brought to start this temple 100 years ago. And I have another candle to show the connection between the two, and that I commit to carrying on that spirit, that light, that energy that you all brought to create this place. And may it continue for another 100 years.
Amen.
The committee got together because we wanted to do something for the people who could not be here that evening. We know it's hard for you to get out, and we wanted to meet with you and have special time with you and have you give us some of your stories. Phyllis gave an excellent speech that night, which I will summarize later. I don't know what happened to it, but I brought Arlene Cohen's scrapbook that she had from the 1950s. I believe it's on that table. She had from the 1950s about sisterhood. And when I look at that and I say it's amazing what the women did back then. And I think we used to do that until everybody got busy with their jobs, but it was just amazing. I was going to welcome Saul Schurter. I hope he comes a little later. And Marty has all the interviews that Saul Schurter did from the 1980s. I know the Graphs, we did it. I don't know if the Arkishes did it. Marty knows more than I did. But he has all the interviews if you want to read them later. And if you want copies, we can make copies for you later, at a later time. Somebody asked if we wanted donations for food. If you want to give donations at the end, you're welcome to. That would be welcomed. And so I hope everybody got one of these booklets. We had these for the May 1st event. If you don't have one, take one on the way out. It's very informative. And I just wanted to read to you some of Phyllis's speech. It was very good. If you want to read it at the end, you could read the whole speech, but I just highlighted a few things. In the first decades of the 20th century, this country and this area saw a great influx of immigrants from Europe. People of various nationalities and religions, among them Jews, who came to the Golden Land, I can't say all this Yiddish, to escape poverty and or prejudice in many forms, including pogroms and to seek opportunity. I remember asking my uncle, probably 20 years ago, why did Zadie and Bobby leave Russia? And he said because they had pogroms, just like in Fiddler on the Roof, and they had one too many pogroms, and they decided to come to America. They were, by and large, Orthodox Jews. They worked hard to survive and to offer a better life to their children. What follows is a quote from an early history of the show. When the congregation first acquired the Pear Street building, what later became the social hall, was a cellar with a dirt floor. Hebrew school was held in a long, narrow room that ran the width of the building behind the sanctuary. It was lit by one light bulb and was very poorly heated. What little heat there was escaped through the door to a small outbuilding used as a sukkah. Proper dress for class included overcoats. Maybe some of you remember this, I don't know. The educational model was the outbuilding used as the educational model was the one-room schoolhouse. Each student began at the back of the room and moved forward as his abilities improved. The incentive for improving was great. At least one rabbi would reward mistakes with a rap on the knuckles with a pool cue. Apparently that wasn't my time. Apparently there was a pool table in the basement. When a boy made it to the front of the room, he was ready for his bar mitzvah. Art Aaron was the first bar mitzvah in the new building, followed by George Myers and Sandy Cotton. Sandy, you were the third bar mitzvah boy.
What year?
It didn't give a year.
At Sandy's request.
In 1932, the same year that Dave Blasberg became a bar mitzvah in Turner's Falls at the Hibernian Hall, just as my dad had done 11 years earlier. The Greenfield community converted the dirt floor basement into a proper social hall at the cost of $1,561.73. That must be what I remember back then. As the congregation grew, a remodeling in 1937 added 2 classrooms, a library, and an entrance hall. The Turners Falls Jewish community, following the initiative of its Greenfield brothers and sisters, purchased an unused German church on K Street near Our Lady of Czestochowa Church in 1937. It housed the small 10-family congregation, B'nai Abraham, which was used for high holiday services and other holiday events until the early 1960s. When the few Jewish families left in Turner's Falls decided to join the Greenfield show. That's when we got them, in 1960. The building was sold in 1969. I have fond memories of high holidays in that show. My grandfather, Sam Rubin, who lived next door to us, would rap on the window of our house and follow in Yiddish, Meyer, et Sitzu Gay show. I don't know, it's time to go to show. Meyer, it's time to go to show. My dad, my uncle, and the boys would join Zadie and walk the mile to the show. An hour later, my mother and girls followed in their footsteps. I still remember the wicker stroller that my baby sister's conveyance, and both she and I still remember the honey cake my mother hid in the stroller so we kids could eat a snack on Yom Kippur. Pretty smart. In his interview with Saul, Dave Blasberg mentioned some of the issues faced by our forebears, getting kosher meat. My mom, who moved here from Springfield in 1933, told me about taking a live chicken in a bag on the trolley from Turner's Falls to Greenfield to be ritually slaughtered by the shoket. She did it only once. I remember taking many of those trips with my parents. Dave, who grew up in Shelburne Falls, remembered taking the train from Shelburne to Greenfield and then the trolley from Greenfield to Holyoke. I believe that there was, briefly, a kosher butcher in Greenfield at one point. Dating. The small number of Jewish teens in the area seldom dated their Jewish friends. So family and friends in other towns set up dates and did a lot of matchmaking. My dad told hilarious stories of traveling in broken down cars to Springfield and Worcester to date Jewish girls. Dave Blasberg said he was allowed to date non-Jewish girls casually, but a date with a Jewish girl was serious business, a reason for his parents to get involved. Prejudice. A number of men interviewed told of anti-Semitic incidences in their childhood. Taunted in the schoolyard by bullies calling them dirty Jews, tyke, and Christ killer, sometimes the boys walked away, but often they fought back. Interesting, some, including Dave and my dad, told of lifelong friendships forged with the boys they had fought. And then, I think just one more paragraph, let's see. In 1948, when Arlene and Cy Cohn came to Greenfield, there were about 70 families in the congregation, but there were no Jews in visibly important positions in town. Boards of banks, the hospital, the YMCA, the Girls Club, for example. Jews were not permitted to join the Greenfield Country Club or the Masonic Lodge. In his interview, Dick Braff used the term understated exclusion to describe the situation. I think Bert Weiner, he had a story that no Jews were allowed in the country club until he entered the Maccabee games, and then they allowed the Jewish people.
They needed the money.
Oh, okay.
Exactly right.
That's right? Okay.
Get broke and they needed the money.
Over time, Jews became more and more accepted as they gained respect for their hard work and their community involvement. Sam Glassberg became a judge, the first Jewish president of the Y, Fair and Hospital, the United Way. Sam became president of everything. And here's our last paragraph. Then, like now, there were not enough people and never enough money to provide all the services the community wanted. Religious, educational, and cultural, so people volunteered. I suspect that many members here tonight recall the times they spent as volunteer teachers, committee members, and organizations of fundraisers and celebrations. I remember well some of the Sunday school teachers who volunteered to teach the classes I was in. Mildred Myers, Harry Warren, Fran Warren, Lee Spungen, and many others.
I'm going to give you a fast rundown on all the information that my father had with about 9 pages. I have it here in about a half a page, so it's very concise. In 1910, 20 Jewish families meetings were held in various halls or clubhouses with Mr. Pastor as our first president. In 1918, L. Michelman took over the presidency. In August of 23, 35 members purchased a crude clubhouse converted to a house of prayer. That's the old show that we have in a photo.
Yeah, the Baptist church.
In September 1924, a proper burial ground was purchased and plans were made to distribute plots. In 1932, the first joint meeting of the Greenfield Hebrew congregation and Greenfield Ladies' Aid was called by Mr. I.D. Aaron to convert the unsightly basement into a suitable community hall. The cost was a fabulous $1,561. Mr. Goldstein was the chairman. In 1937, due to the Ladies' Aid effort, our mortgage was burned, and also we celebrated the 70th birthday of the late Mrs. Carrie Levy. In 1937, the president-elect was my father, and the first synagogue expansion took place. 2 classrooms were added, 2 rooms in front of the auditorium for meetings, and a library with office facilities and our present entrance to the synagogue. In 1955, our membership grew to, this is fabulous, to 100 members, 90 children in the Sunday school. That was fantastic. And 48 children in our Hebrew school, of 7 volunteer teachers. The teachers were all volunteered at that time. Harvey Kramer and Jack Brownstein were very influential in making plans for our enlarged facilities. Also, much praise must be given to Mr. Simon Cohen and Norman Ebert to the fundraising committee. So with starting with nothing, and the terrible old edifice of like a clubhouse, we became what we are now. My father, by the way, I hardly knew, I hate to say this, he was so busy with our store. He was so busy with 5 years of being a president. He used to go to the store Sundays when no one was around so he could pay his bills, write checks out, and make ads out for the next week. So when I say I hardly knew my father, it was true. He worked himself. He was so busy doing everything that he hardly had any home life. But he was a great guy. He had a dynamite ambition. He had tremendous drive, and it proved so in the 6 years that he became president.
Can you tell us? Can you tell us what kind of store he had and where it was?
Our store is now there. It's a home furnishing company, 122 Main, Greenfield. We've been there 90 years. This is our 90th anniversary this year, which we're very proud of. There are very few stores that can say that they've been there over 20 or 30 or 40. We've been there 90. And with my son there now, and my son-in-law and my wife and my daughter and myself, we're still working very hard to keep going.
And your father founded it?
My father, oh, this is interesting. My father was, when he came home from Russia, he was 8 years old. He had a milk room. Later on in life, when he was about 18, 19, I guess, he went to work in a furniture store in Bridgeport, Connecticut. Now, every time a salesman came in, my father always asked them, if you would locate, where would you locate in the area? All the salesmen said Greenfield. Why? Because Greenfield was a dynamite town for the Millis Falls, the Tool Company, Wells Tool, the Weldon Hotel, the Mansion House. We had railroads coming into town. I mean, the town was fabulous.
And barges coming up the Connecticut River.
And of course, I didn't mention many of the gentlemen who, like the Braffs, the Kramers, we had a tremendous force of energetic men that really made this synagogue the way it is now.
And did your father buy into the furniture business or did he establish it?
Another funny story. He bought the building where we are now, 122 Main, and the real estate man told my father one figure. I don't know what it is, but it doesn't matter. When my father told him that he wanted to purchase the building, he jumped at $30,000. So my father was going crazy. He wanted the store. So he went to all his relations, and eventually he acquired the money to pay the additional to get the store where we are now.
And he established the store?
Yes, yeah, in 1919. Yeah, that makes it 90 years.
When did your uncle come into it? When did his brother come into it?
My father had a brother, Abe Abrahamson. Yeah, they worked together. I had my cousin there. He's gone. Bob Oates was an excellent worker. He was one of the family. Of course, he's long gone. Most of the good guys are gone, unfortunately.
You say the bad guys are here?
Thanks, Dan.
Marion Cotton, and for many years everybody knew me, oh, you're Sandy's wife. So I'm relatively new. I've only been here 60 years, so I'm not a native. And my husband was born here, and he was in business for, I don't know how many years, but a second generation clothing business. And so when I came here 60 years ago, I said, what am I doing here in this town? There's no Jewish people here. They don't know what whipped butter is. I don't know where any of it going. Never mind kosher food. I mean, they didn't. My mother said, "What are you cracking up there for in all the wilderness?" Well, here I am, and it's been a wonderful experience. Sandy was treasurer of the temple for many, many years, and at that time, only men were members of the temple. We didn't count. We were second-class citizens. So Ruby Kramer used to come to my house. He would knock on the door and he would say, "I need to speak to Sanford." I knew why he was there. He wanted to pay his dues, a certain amount each month, but I wasn't allowed to know that. So I had to go into another room. And Sandy taught Sunday school for a good many years, and I filled in with him when we didn't go to Boston. And I was treasurer of Hadassah for umpteen years. We used to have meetings of Hadassah at people's homes. And the year that Sam Blasberg built his home in Turners Falls, Jean said to me, "We're going to have the meeting at my home because we will have a tremendous meeting. Everybody wants to see the home that Sam and I are building in Turners." And she was right. It was full house because everybody was interested to see that. And Sam and Jean were wonderful, wonderful people. I want to talk about the rummage sale that we ran and the big bridges that we had. The rummage sale, the last one we had, there were 4 of us. We did tremendous amount of work with our husbands, schlepping and doing. And I don't know exactly how much money we raised, but there was enough to do a lot of work in the kitchen
The
area.
outside community used to love our rummage sale.
Right, the
They used
rummage
to line
sales
up
and
at
the-
the door waiting for it to open.
Oh, yeah. And the bridge, the big bridge too, were tremendous successes. We had a lot of, the community were always asking, "When are you people going to have the big bridge?" Because it was so, it was really.
Car party.
It was car party. We called it the big bridge that you could do mahjong or whatever you wanted to do. But they were very popular. Everybody worked on them. And of course, the girls today are working, so it was difficult. We weren't working then. We were just raising our children.
Right.
So that was easy.
You were like the Molly Goldbergs back then.
The what? Not quite. I don't know if anybody knew it but one year for my in-laws, Henry and Ruth Cotton's anniversary, my in-laws, who were very lucky to have 7 children, and we dedicated a Torah cover which is used at the high holidays. And it always brings out some wonderful memories. I can see my father-in-law sitting beside me at Temple. And I didn't always want to sit in that particular place. He said, "No, this is a family, this is where we sit, this is where we have to sit." And my girls knew too, even though they used to come there when they were young, and they used to wait to meet the boys from Deerfield Academy, but they had to sit with Grandpa for a little while anyway. So it was really a wonderful way to bring up the children. It was difficult because I wanted to make sure that my children went only with Jewish boys. And I remember my daughter saying to me, "I don't always ask a boy if he's Jewish. Doesn't make a difference." I said, "Well, it will one day." And so I think they see now the difference because it's made a big impact in their lives. And they say now, it was a nice time to grow up in Greenfield. It was a small town. And it was difficult because I wasn't used to this kind of upbringing. But we managed, and it was a wonderful way, and it was quite a trip. And I want to thank you all.
Where'd your daughters move to?
My daughter lives in Atlanta, Georgia, and my younger daughter lives in East Greenwich, Rhode Island. So they're very active in their temple there, and I think that some of their things that they learned here in Greenfield has steered them well.
Kaladi, Schneur Zalman, and I didn't know anybody else with that name till he came along, or I came along, and we linked up. At any rate, the Kolodnys came to Greenfield in 1940. We were sort of latecomers, and my parents had been living in White River Junction, Vermont, if you're familiar with that community, which at the time was a railroad junction, and my father and his brother had a little department store there, and were the only Jews for miles around. And what occasioned our move here was the fact that my older brother Bert was getting close to bar mitzvah age. And he actually went and lived with my father's sister in Burlington, Vermont for a year so he could go to Hebrew school. But my dad wanted to move to a town with a Jewish community. And he too asked the salesman, where would you go if you were going to open a store? And Greenfield was the place. So in 1940, we moved here. I was 5, so you can figure out how old I am now. And he opened a ladies' clothing store, actually in the next block from Home Furnishing at 136 Main Street, I think it was.
What was it called?
It's called Kolodny's, and it's now where the Magical Child is. My older brother was bar mitzvahed here, my middle brother was bar mitzvahed here, and I too was bar mitzvahed here, standing on a box so I could see over the beam up in the old synagogue.
Who was the rabbi then? Do you
The
remember?
rabbi was Israel Halpern. But when we first came here, the rabbi, I believe, for a short period of time was a Rabbi Berger, if I remember correctly, and then Rabbi Trepp, Leo Trepp, was here. And you talked about knuckle rapping before. He was German by birth, came here, was one of the refugees who left before the war. Very stern man. If you were sitting in services and made any noise while service was going on, yelled, Kalani, quiet! And you would then be quiet. Let's see, okay. Greenfield was a very different community at that time, and people asked me, I was gone, I left, my family and I left here in 1957, and I didn't come back until 1994, and of course things had changed, and people said, well, what's the big difference between then and now? And I said, well, the community has sort of gone down a bit because all the Jewish merchants are gone. Because in the 40s and 50s, there were either 4 or 5 women's clothing stores, all owned and run by Jews.
What were their names?
There was Ann August's and Aliber's, and my dad's place, Kolodny's, and there was Peggy Parker. Goodnose, and then Michaelman's had a women's department, and then Rosen's had a women's department.
Ralph and Rich, you say Peggy Parker?
Peggy Parker was Marvin Newman. Yeah.
And Rich.
And Braff and Rich had a store.
Dan Ragavan had
And Dan Ragavan had a men's clothing store. And then there were a bunch of furniture stores. There was Home Furnishings, there was Wayne Shaw's, there was Ruby's. You'll have to prompt
The
me.
one on
because-
Hopes.
And there were 3 in Turner Cross.
Oh, 3
Rachel
turn-
Collins,
Yeah.
Lapidus.
And then there was, even the 2 taxi drivers in town were the Davidson brothers. The only taxi in town. They drove wonderful Packard cars, and their taxi stand was at the railroad station.
Company on Bank Road, just Carol's father.
So that was the engine that drove the merchant community in this town.
Why didn't the children go into their father's businesses or mother's businesses?
Because, you know, they wanted to be able to say, my son the dentist, my son the lawyer, my son the doctor.
The
It was
GI
education.
Bill, the guys who came out of the war went to college.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Well, I think the parents all wanted the next better thing for their child. So that was education, that was a profession.
So very few took over their parents' businesses.
Well, Abrahamsons, I think, are
I think we're the only ones.
the only ones now.
We're stubborn.
So that, there was some anti-Semitism. I remember being chased home from school one day by 2 girls. we had moved from Congress Street to Union Street, and these two girls lived on Union Street, and they didn't want a Jew living on Union Street. So I got chased home.
How'd they know you were Jewish?
The payers gave it away.
No, I think it must have come from their parents, I would assume. I mean, why else would they be prejudiced against Jews? I don't know. At any rate, I have very fond memories of growing up in Greenfield, and my segue to the next speaker is to say that when I was 16, I worked for Dick Braff in his cleaning shop at the front counter, taking in dirty clothes and dispensing refurbished clothes. And I also...
Not dirty, soiled.
Soiled, excuse me. And I also drove your old Dodge panel delivery truck. So, with that, I will surrender the podium to Barbara Braff.
Barbara August Braff. The reason I picked the August is because my family came from Northampton. My father was Jack August of the restaurant fame, and he also, in the 50s, chaired the committee to build a new synagogue in Northampton, and I was very proud of that. He was a builder. And when I was a child, I was very lucky because as a girl, you were supposed to be up in the balcony in Northampton. And I always sat next to my father and played with his Tillotson fridge and had a ball. When I met Richard the first time, it was in this synagogue, well, not this one, but the old synagogue. They were having a cabaret night. My Uncle Sam was going to be a chorus girl. And he was my father's first cousin, and he married my mother's sister. So we were doubly related. They invited my sister and I to sing there, and I was 15 and she was 20. We sang, and my Aunt Stella, who was always the matchmaker, I was 5'11" at a very young age, and I was 15, and she said, "Come, I want you to meet somebody." So Dick had just gotten out of the service at that time, and she brought me over to him, introduced us, and later on he told her she's too young for me. That was it. Okay, skip 5 years later, and he was coming back from a buying trip in New York, and he stopped in Northampton, and he was going to have a nice fish dinner at my father's place, and I had come home from college with a, what do they call it, an infected tooth. Abscess, thank you. And I didn't go back to college. I went to work in one of the dress stores, and I was there for lunch. And he came in, and my mother knew him, of course, and she said, "Why don't you come and sit with us, Dick?" So he sat across the table, and that's how we met the second time, and the rest is history. Anyway, when we went, Dick was an usher at Marion's wedding, and Sandy's, of course, and because they had known each other since they were 6 years old. And he asked if he could bring me. We weren't even engaged. And they said very kindly yes. So we spent that evening at the wedding. And Marion was like 4'11", and I was 5'11". She looked up at me, and I looked down at her, and she said to Sandy, "I don't think this is going to work." Anyway, we became best friends. And the long story is we worked together in this community on rummage sales, on card parties. Those card parties, we used to get together with Marge Borofsky, who had a jewelry business, and she made the most adorable little gifts to give to people, you know, the door prizes, and also table prizes. Everybody went home with one of these little gifts. And it was a nice time in life.
Money making.
Yeah, right, it was fundraising. And in 1958, we went to at that time it was going to be Temple Israel Sisterhood meeting. And Fran Warren was there, Hilda Hook was there, my sister-in-law Dottie Rich was there, and they needed a president. And Hilda said, why don't you become president, Barbara? I said, I don't know anything about being president. She says, well, we'll help you. And Fran said, we'll help you. And Dottie said, we'll help you. So I became president for the 58-59 year of the Temple Israel Sisterhood. One of the best years of my life, by the way. They all were wonderful. All I had to do was delegate. And everything was done. It was terrific. If you know how to delegate, it's great to be president. And at that time, of course, they gave out a presidential pin. I should have worn it for the year 58, 59, and I treasure that. We were on the building committee. My son and my husband became involved in the new temple. And I want to tell you, when I first saw the blueprints, it was not this. It did not look like this. They changed it as they went along because we were very disappointed, I'm sorry to say, when we saw this temple. It was supposed to have been a little different. Anyway, that's my story. And
Tell us about the business your family was in up here.
The dry cleaning business?
Yeah,
my
please.
husband took me there on a Sunday to look at the plant. It was on School Street at that time, 11 School Street. And I looked at it and I said, honey, you're going to have to clean this place up. And at that time, he took me very seriously. We bought racks where we put different colored bags, and when people brought in their orders, we would make out a ticket, take their orders in our hands, one over the other like this, and list it and tell them it'll be ready at a certain time. Well, they liked that. And the windows were clean. And everything was neat. And we had a real do-over in 1960. We put a new machine in, which was one of the new dry-to-dry machines. No, it was a new
Transfer, but it was a
transfer machine, but a perk machine. It was the new solvent that really did a great job. And we built our business I wrote the advertising, as my father did with his fish business. And I had a ball at it because I love to write. And we built it till we moved to our present location, 430 Federal Street, where Royal Cleaners was selling. And Royal Cleaners was the location my husband had dreamed about all his life. And he said to me, do you want to try it? And I said, sure, why not? He said, because I can't do it alone. I said, okay. So we bought Royal Cleaners and we became Braff's Royal, R-O-Y-L. Everybody thought we misspelled it. It was a man's name, and it was Braff's Royal Cleaners. And we closed it up about 2001, 2002. Yeah, and it's now AutoZone.
Why did you close it? Did the dry cleaning business totally change?
It changed for us. We had some bad experiences, and we felt it was better to close up rather than just fade away into ignominious.
We retired,
Yeah.
and we allowed the business to be run by others. It wasn't...
Absentee management did not work. It did not work.
When we let go, we really let go.
Yeah.
And
It's our fault.
I'm responsible for that, but I trust
Hush, honey,
others to do things, and they just couldn't.
Right.
No one does anything like you do.
That's
How
true.
did the family get into dry cleaning in the beginning?
His father came from a career in clothing,
Tailoring.
up in...
Manufacturing, really.
Yeah, he manufactured suits up in Montreal. And when he came down here, they had cousins in North Adams. And that's where Dick was born. And he went into business with these two other people. And
He became a third partner in a manufacturing coats.
Right.
They had solicited him to come down and operate the plant. And I'll go up there.
Partners.
Yeah.
And he decided to move to Greenfield, right?
Yes.
And when
They
he
were
met...
keeping two sets of books. And
Yeah.
my father found out through a banker And so he decided they would dissolve. He never got anything for it. And like everyone else, he had found that Greenfield was a very prosperous place.
Everybody did.
Yeah.
Every place is. You know, these people who came from Europe were not overly, they really weren't educated to a degree that we are today. They were people who had good, sound, common sense. They became business people out of necessity because they weren't allowed anything else. They couldn't become professionals. They couldn't work for certain companies. They were excluded. And because of that, they became business people. They had a couple of bucks and they would gamble. And the gambling paid off because they went into business at a time when hard work and perseverance paid off. We, as the children, went to school. We learned something. We learned something else. I went to school and I studied my business, but my children have gone to school and become smarter than I am, much smarter. Our kids are so much brighter. They know better than to go into a business where you're going to spend 50 hours a week anyway working. So they become doctors, they become lawyers, they become accountants, they become everything but business people.
So tell them about John, the banker, and your father.
Oh.
Can't think of his last name.
Higas?
Higas, thank you.
Yeah, Higas, in those days, Higas, who was a major banker in Greenfield, everyone had to deal with this man somehow, but he had a different understanding of banking. In those days, integrity, you didn't have to have collateral as much as you had to have integrity. If you were a hard-working person, and he recognized that, you could have anything you wanted. You could borrow money on your name. You didn't have collateral. So many of us used our good name and we borrowed money, and he would loan it to you.
On a handshake.
On a handshake.
That was it.
And it was fantastic. So we grew and grew and grew, and everyone that wanted to grow could. Today, we're at a tough time. Our kids are, well, first of all, I want to tell you, I'm very proud of this community. This congregation should be proud of themselves. This community, the area, respects you. And every one of you who's succeeded has increased our image in the community.
That's so.
It's not any one of us, it's all of us. We either sink or swim together. And I've known that for years. But education is the key to everything. And you are providing that here. And I missed that when I was a kid. And if you can, remember, not only education, but you have to give your kids time, your time. I don't know, I cheated my kids because I was ambitious and I thought money was so important.
Like your father. He spent more time in the plant than he did at home.
That's right. But
it was necessary.
Today, it isn't necessary. I think you have to spend your time instead of your money and give it to your kids.
My name is Carol Weiss Arkish, and I have been a resident of Greenfield and associated with Temple Israel for about 65 plus years.
Wow.
I have brought a few items with me that paint a picture of my family, their lives here in Greenfield from the early 1900s. I don't know where they're over there. The pictures of my grandparents, my parents, my grandfather's horse played a very important role in our family.
I remember it well.
Much of what I recall about the early 1900s are hand-me-down stories from my family. My grandparents, Samuel Ellis Harrison and Anna Ella Jacobs Harrison, moved to Greenfield from Springfield shortly after my mother, Ida, was born in 1903. Sam Harrison's family were settled in the Wallingford, Bridgeport, Connecticut area. My grandmother's family, the Jacobs, lived in North Adams. I have no idea how my grandparents met. There seemed to be a network of folks in and around the valley from Springfield, Pittsfield, North Adams, and Northampton, with a very good exchange, probably based on the mode of transportation available. The Harrisons lived at the beginning of Elm Street in a very large brick house. The house is still there. However, the barns and several bays on the slope behind the house are gone. My grandfather operated a scrap business from Elm Street property. He did this business from his large wagon, pulled by his faithful and treasured horse, Tom. Grandpa was known to have stopped quite often at his favorite ice cream shop on Main Street. He never tied Tom up to the hitching post and often had to walk home because Tom must have gotten very tired of waiting. He made his way down Main Street back to Elm Street on his own with Teddy the dog at his...
Just want to hold it up for a second.
with Teddy the dog as his only passenger. The Harrisons had 5 more children while living on Elm Street. And maybe some of you remember their names. Catherine, Esther, Morris, Sidney, and Thomas, rumored to have been named after the horse. Their mother, Anna, died at age 37, October 14, 1918, during the flu epidemic. She had nursed all the children through the flu, and she couldn't go on any longer. She was pregnant with her 7th child at the time of her death. She is buried in the City of Home Cemetery in Wilbraham, Mass. Temple Israel did not have a cemetery at that time. I think we heard today it was established in 1923? 24. So once again, old Tom was put into service. He carried my grandmother all the way to Wilbraham, pulling the buckboard. Wow. Grandpa died August 1937 at the age of 57 of a heart attack. Actually, he had married his housekeeper, a Jewish woman with 2 children. I believe you alluded to them. They were taxi drivers. My grandfather had a severe heart condition, and he used to go to Florida every year. When he returned, he found that his second wife, Bessie Davidson, had sold all his scrap, emptied out all the barns. He had a series of heart attacks and he died. He is buried here in the Greenfield Cemetery. Together, they were active members of the Jewish community. They were part of the group that incorporated Temple Israel. Among my many treasures is a pin presented to my mother in the 1940s in honor of my grandmother, who was the first sisterhood president. I feel compelled to tell a little story about my grandfather and a tall steel safe. And I'm sure my husband's going to roll his eyes. He's heard the story so many times. The steel shelf that was placed on the front lawn of my grandparents' property. It seems that Grandpa bought the safe for scrap because the owners could not get it open, nor could he. No one ever knew if there was anything of value in it. It was too heavy to bring to the barn in the bins in the back, so it slowly sank into the ground, bordering the Elm Street sidewalk. And I've been told many times that Grandpa used to climb on top of it. Elm Street was as busy as Main Street was, and he used to watch the traffic go by. The last time I saw it, it was 5 or 6 years ago. The top of it was sticking up about 2 or 3 inches, half hidden by a row of hedges. It is no longer visible. My parents, Ida Harrison and Samuel Weiss, met in Greenfield. He had recently moved from Pittsfield area. She had graduated from a secretarial school and was working in the Main Street area. Dad was several years older than my mom, and my grandfather objected to their romance. Eventually, they eloped to Bennington, Vermont on November 7th, 1921, taking Dad's good friend, Max Gans, with them as a witness. They returned to Greenfield the same day, but they did not tell Mom's family that they were married. Dad went to his rented apartment on Miles Street. Mom went home to Elm Street and hid her wedding ring in a drawer. Several weeks later, her sister Catherine found the ring, told her father, and he then arranged for them to be married by a rabbi here in Greenfield. I was told that they had a rather elaborate wedding lasting quite a few days. The tradition then was for guests to play out the marriage and mock ceremony. And since my grandmother had died only a few years before, Molly Hodis, mother-in-law of Betty Hodis, and a good friend of my deceased grandmother, helped with all the wedding arrangements. Now, a few years ago, our son Evan obtained a marriage certificate from the Bennington Archives as a surprise for me. So it was kind of nice to finally see a wedding certificate and that they were really married in Vermont and got back here the same day. Soon after, the newlyweds purchased a home on River Street where my sister Dee, actually Ann Eleanor, was born in 1923. I arrived much later in 1938. My parents opened a used furniture store and an antique shop on Bank Road. They occupied a double store where Village Pizza is now. My mom loved business, and I was a tot in the store when she worked side by side with my dad.
What was the business called?
It was called Franklin Furniture Company, and it was mostly used household furniture and some antiques. And it was on Bank Road. Many years later, they moved the business to the barns on River Street because my dad was not well. Mom continued to run the business, going from house to barn while my dad recovered. My dad was a very creative person. He restored fine old furniture, worked with copper, with material. He had golden hands and great imagination and could work with any medium. I often went to school dressed in jumpers that he embroidered. I had coats and jodhpurs trimmed with fur that he designed and executed. Of course, one of our family in Pittsfield was a furrier, so my dad would buy pelts from my Uncle Moisha, and he would embellish all my outfits. He made a Jenny Lind crib for me when I was born, and it has been used by 3 generations in our family. My dad joined our household many years later when Howard and I moved back to Greenfield from New Jersey in 1963. He lived a happy and productive life, and he died at age 92. Even though he was the one that was sick when they were first married, he lived long after my mother had died. Mom passed away in 1955 after a long battle with cancer. She was only 52. To escape the pogroms, Dad left Russia at a very young age, a very young man. He had to lie about his age to buy a ticket on one of those famous ships. This was his second attempt. When he wanted to leave, he had a little money. He left home, but his father ran after him, got him, and brought him back.
He was 16.
And then, he was only 16. And then a few months later, he ran again, and that time he lied. He said he was 18 to get on the ship, and he did come to this country. He had one brother who left Russia a few years before and settled in Pittsfield. Joseph Weiss, his wife Katie, and adopted daughter Rhoda were our only links to the large family in Russia. And I just want to note that Rhoda is still alive. She's in her 80s. She was, I don't know if she was a friend of Marcia's, but they knew each other through what, Young Judea, between North Adams and Pittsfield. And she was also a good friend of the Skulls, who live in Turners Falls. So there was this kind of network that happened all through the valley.
They were from Pittsfield too.
They were from Pittsfield too, the Skulls, Carol and Don. When my dad first came to this country through Ellis Island from Kamenets-Podolsk, Russia, he stayed in New York City for several months until he earned enough money to follow Joe to Pittsfield. I wanted to say that my Aunt Katie actually introduced me to Jewish foods. My mother could cook. She did not like to cook. She rarely made anything that smacked of Jewish foods. But when we got to Pittsfield, Katie had an array of food that was just outstanding. Foods like pacha, which is calf's foot jelly, homemade kishka, stuffed cabbage, you name it. And so that's how I became acquainted with all the good stuff. Dad was absorbed in his brother's furniture business, but, let me see, I lost my place. Dad was absorbed in his brother's furniture store, but soon struck out on his own, opening a children's clothing store in Lenox. He would buy plain clothes from vendors in New York, trim them with fur and other materials, embroider them, and sell them to the locals. After a few years, he took a trip to Greenfield. It was a turning point in his life. He fell in love with the beautiful tree-lined main street of Greenfield and its bustling business atmosphere. He moved to Greenfield and met my mom. Over the years, we visited back and forth to Pittsfield, up and over the mountains through the back roads of Ashfield and beyond. The ride was always a punishment for me. Car sick all the way. We always stopped at the freshwater tubs of pure spring water along the road. I would catch my breath, and Dad would pour cold water into the radiator to cool the steaming car, and then we would be off again. My mom's brothers and sisters left one by one after their mother died, and basically because my grandfather had remarried, and it wasn't a happy atmosphere. They went to Wallingford and Bridgeport, Connecticut, where Grandpa's father originally came from. We had years of wonderful visits back and forth with them, picnics and family celebrations. Every summer they came to Greenfield to help my father with the hay. We had 2 big hay fields in front of our then store. During the war years, we raised chickens. Meat was expensive and hard to get, so we supplied the whole Bridgeport family with chickens and eggs. They would bring hard-to-find items from our Kaplan Cousins store, which was in Wallingford, Connecticut. And occasionally we would buy meat from Barger's or Mr. Miller. They were both beef people, meat people here in Greenfield, and my mother used to call it the black market meat. I'm going to skip a whole area because I think you know a lot about the 40s, 50s, and 60s, and I'm going to jump to Sunday school. Our Sunday school class was a typical one-room, all-age class. My classmates were Marilyn Blasberg, the only Jewish person in my public school classes from kindergarten to 12th grade. Wow. The Reuben brothers, Arnold and Ben from Turners Falls, Ann August, and I really can't remember the rest. Our teacher was Hilda Hook. The rabbi, Harold B. Kunovich, and his wife Bernice ran a summer camp in the Conway area. The camp was called Joe Day Row, named for his children, Jonathan, David, and Robin. It must have been fun because I remember spending a few years there. Many, many years later, when our children attended Hebrew and Sunday school, there were all kinds of holiday plays and celebrations and famous family picnics at the end of the year. The men did the cooking, the women supplied the side dishes, followed by the great baseball games where the Mickey Mantles showed their stuff. We often took family picnic rides on Sunday to pick walnuts. We went to Ashfield and Conway, and we visited the Asparagus Man in Hatfield, the Cheese Man in Millis Falls, where bags of cheese would hang and the whey would drip. We always had something fun to do on Family Day. Often taking our fishing poles with us, I would fish alongside my father, while my mother stayed on the bank and worked on her braided rugs. It was a peaceful and it was a very simple life. By that time, my sister had graduated from college. She had moved on to Boston, and she was living there probably for 10, 12 years before she moved back to Greenfield. Now, before I put you all to sleep, I would like to mention a few names from the past that may be familiar to you. Families who lived in Greenfield and helped to shape the Jewish community. Many had businesses along Main Street and Federal Street. Isadora Abramson had a furniture store on Main Street. At one time, it was a building, a car showroom, right? Wasn't it car showroom?
Right.
The Bargers had a meat market. Marcus McClure had a meat and a deli store on the east side of Bank Road, while the Rispler brothers ran a wallpaper and paint store just under the McCarthy's funeral home.
What years were these? What years were these? Way before we came, the 60s.
Oh, let me see, I was born in 1938, and so it had to be 38, 40, during the war years.
Okay.
During the
The
war years.
Risklers had a store there till mid-late 60s.
Right until the 60s, right. And they were very active members of this community, of the temple.
Manny Moe and Jack.
So Marcus McClure and his meat and deli store was on the east side of Bank Row. The Rispler brothers had the paint and wallpaper store also on Bank Row, just under McCarthy's funeral home. And Danny Ragovan and Dr. Kolodny cleared this up for me. I had no idea what he did, but he was somewhat of a roving ambassador here in town. That is, when he wasn't fishing. Harry Miller bought and sold farm animals from the back of his truck. His wife, Leah, was known far and wide for her wonderful cooking skills. They had 2 children, Louis and Marilyn. And you just knew that she was a great cook because all 4 of them were very rotund.
Another child.
They did. The Millers had a child that was killed in the war, and he's buried here at the Temple Cemetery.
Sergeant Miller.
What's his name?
Sergeant Miller.
Headstone.
Joseph
Yeah.
Miller.
Joseph Miller.
He's at the front of the cemetery.
Right, just as you walk into the cemetery. The Kolodnys and the Cohens had a dry goods store in the area. The Kramers also scrap metal dealers on Wells Street. The Bernsteins had a similar business on Shelburne Hill, where the Ford garage is today. Some of you may remember their daughter, Ann Bernstein Aaron, married to dentist Arthur Aaron. Molly and Abraham Hodis had a meat market on Chapman Street. And Allie and Minnie Braff, a dry cleaning plant somewhere near Main Street.
School Street.
Where was it?
School Street.
School Street, okay.
Oh, wait a minute.
Chapman Street.
You're right. It was right next to,
Barrett and Baker's, I thought, right?
next to the butcher.
Next to
Molly Hodis' husband. Same building.
Oh, on Chapman Street.
Yeah, same
Okay.
building.
right next to
There were several Blasberg families and a very large Cotton family. The Myers, George and Mary, had a large cattle business in the Meadows.
Yeah.
And I'm sure I forgot many of the other names, but basically these were the people that I knew. These were the people that my mother and father were friendly with.
Anyone remember Gendler's?
Gendlers, I do, but I don't know what they did.
Albert.
Greenfield was a safe and happy place to grow up in. The Jewish people were pretty well respected by the townspeople. There was a good business recovery after the war, and more Jewish families came to reside here and join the temple.
I came to Greenfield in 1971. I had got a teaching job up here, Apparently I had applied for a job in Dover, Sherborne. I went to Shelburne Falls
By accident.
by accident. And the superintendent secretary says, well, we know you didn't mean this to come here, but we may have an application, apply, we have an opening. So meanwhile, I go to I know nothing about Massachusetts because I'm from Connecticut, and I go look at a map and go, where the hell is Shelburne Falls? Never mind Greenfield, you know. So I go up to Shelburne Falls. The first time it looked like a cowboy town. I expected Matt Dillon to walk out. I went for an interview. I had 3 interviews. I got the job, and then the superintendent said, we think you better live in Greenfield. That's a little more city-like than Shelburne Falls. And Greenfield was small to me. So I moved to Greenfield. My maiden name was Burson, Lenore Burson. And my name was in the paper a lot because I gave a lot of concerts with my schools. And every time there was a concert, people would walk up to Mark Burson and shake his hand and say, oh, your wife's name was in the paper. She did a great job. No, she's not my wife.
What did you teach?
Instrumental music in 5 schools. So when we got engaged, he walked up to Marty and said, thank you for changing your name. and then 5 years later, I had David. So this is 5 years I've been a glazer. I know you still call me Burson sometimes.
Yes, I do.
Some people still call me Burson. So 5 years later, there's a son to Lenore and Marty Glazer, and we're walking downtown Main Street, and people are congratulating Mark Burson that he had a son. So they're still thinking of me as a person. And then, I guess, 5 years later, Seth was born, and they still congratulated Mark. So I guess Mark has a couple of kids that he doesn't know about. But I guess when I came to Greenfield, it was I was single, lonely. I remember calling up Marcia, Nell's wife, Sylvia Abrahamson, you know, about the welcome wagon, because I needed something. I was so lonely. So she came, and I found out about the synagogue, and I came to meetings. I know one time I sat with Barbara and Dick for the high holidays. One time Barbara invited me to one of her son's bar mitzvahs because I guess she thought she wanted me part of her family. Somebody would ask me out.
Musical.
So that didn't, but anyway, and then, so Marty's cousin, some of you may have known him, David Goldshire, used to fix up the people of Marty's family. So he fixed Marty up with Wendy Blasberg, who was Dottie and Dave's daughter.
Dave and Nettie.
Dave and Nettie. Yeah, excuse me, Nettie. They didn't hit it off. So one day, Wendy says to me, she was the superintendent's secretary, I met this guy, he's not my type, he's your type. Here's his name, send him a birthday card. I'm not that desperate. I'm not sending somebody a card I don't know. So I go home and I ask my brother-in-law, and he goes, no, don't do it. Well, something made me do it, and here I am, Marty's wife. So that's how I got to Greenfield.
Here's the other part of the story. I get this card in the mail, and it says, Wendy said it's your birthday. Happy birthday. So I say, I don't know this person. So I rip it up and throw it in the barrel. So my father, being very wise from the old country, says, do you hear anybody knocking at the door? I said, no. So he said it 10 more times, and I'm saying the old man's losing his hearing. At the 11th time, I hear the statement and the answer. There's nobody knocking at the door. So my father says, don't be a schmuck, pick that piece of paper up and give her a call. And the rest is history, but great story. The funniest story is, I had asked my mother 2 weeks before, how do you know you're in love? So my mom says, don't worry, you'll know when it's time, you'll know. I go on the first date with her, she opens up the door, I'm in love. I come home, and my mother says, well, I said, remember when you asked me, when I asked you, how do you know you're in love? Guess what, Mom? I'm in love. She says, Sam, get in here. to honor those wonderful Jewish men and women, pioneers, who chose to immigrate to Greenfield and build a Jewish life with their families. These founding fathers and mothers of the first Hebrew congregation of Greenfield set down a blueprint of how to get things done for 100 years. Their achievements rightly deserve the respect and admiration from the generations that came after them. By leaving funds in their wills, those forward-thinking and committed pioneers of the first congregation of Greenfield planted a seed that grew into Temple Israel. The pioneers committed to Judaism allowed their dream to still live today. It looks a little different, feels and sounds a little different, but the religious fervor is still there. Today, it is with pride and humility that we honor their memory, their wisdom, their commitment to live a Jewish life. We have a vibrant community today of diverse religious congregants who share their knowledge and talent to make their religious services very approachable. After reading Isidore Abraham's history of the growth of the temple, I was proud to be involved with this Jewish community. Their sacrifice and hard work in creating a community based on Jewish ethics became the model. Now it's our job for the next 100 years to keep it going. And we will.
We won't be here, but we'll keep.
Are you going anyplace? Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech olam shehechionu v'kiyimanu v'hihyanu lazman haseh.
Amen.